So we're now going to, it's our fourth and final chapter of the book on records. The timing is perfect. I'm going to ask, I'll say for the last time, QVT to our colleague Jez. And we're now talking about records. And you've highlighted some great records that talk about the evolution of music and dance music. Greg, where do you want to set the scene with records, and what would you like to kick off chatting with our audience about?
Well, I mean, I suppose looking at something like
notes.
How disco evolves and where it kind of originally comes from. If you go back to America in late '73, there's a track released called "Love's Theme" by Love Unlimited Orchestra, and that was Barry White. He'd started Love Unlimited, which was a kind of Supremes type girl group, and he was producing and orchestrating. And it was only because he did a kind of cameo appearance on one of their tracks that he decided to become an artist and famous artist.
So the record that came first. I didn't know that. I did not know that.
The one I love, and he it's a telephone conversation. He's like, "Hey, baby," he growled.
You got the voice, Greg. You got it.
He comes on and becomes Barry White. He was taken from Isaac Hayes, who was a similar kind of approach and this deep masculine kind of vibe to him. But Love's Theme was this beautiful instrumental track from this proto-disco period that in early '74 went to #1. And when a record goes to #1, the industry starts to look, what is this? And by the middle of '74, these records started to emerge that would start to define disco. One of the most important was George McRae, "Rock You Baby." Yeah. This record was #1 all over the world. It sold by the millions. It was from TK, a Miami-based label, Henry Stone's label. And so also very early use of a drum machine on it, very basic kind of drum machine. But "Rock You Baby" was like the birth of disco for a lot of people. It was the same in the UK, because I mentioned before a track called "Hey Girl, Don't Bother Me" by the Tams, which was an oldie that was re-released, became a #1. I think 3 years had passed before there was another #1 by a black artist, apart from Chuck Berry did "My Ding-a-Ling," which was a novelty single, so you can discount that. So all this fallow period where you hadn't had a black artist at #1, which you'd had through the Motown sound in the '60s and everything, then all of a sudden 3 come at once. You had, I can't remember which order at the top of my head, but "Rock You Baby," George McRae, Carl Douglas, "Kung Fu Fighting," which was a British recording produced by a guy called Biddu, who was like massively into the South Soul kind of, the Philadelphia International sound, the MFSB sound, put his own orchestra together. And Kung Fu Fighting was #1 in America as well that summer. So, and the other one was "When Will I See You Again" by the 3 Degrees on Philadelphia. So now, I think that's where you can start looking from the US point of view, that the disco is being taken very seriously as a direction in its own right. Maybe not quite a genre yet as such, but it's about to become that. And the same with the UK. You've got like now this renaissance of black music with all these records hitting #1, and so that kind of sets the tone for. I look at disco like really hitting in from a UK perspective. Again, I can't say from the US, but I say '76, because you've got like Donna Summer releasing "Love to Love You Baby," late '75, going in the charts '76, and I think from that point you're really seeing it growing quick. But before that, you were playing it earlier at the beginning, "Never Can Say Goodbye," Gloria Gaynor, which was 1974. She was the original disco queen, and that was a very important kind of record as well, because it was one of the sides had 3 tracks, and it was continuous. And the guy behind that was Tom Moulton, who became the great salsa.
Amazing, yeah.
And Tom Moulton goes back to a club called the Sandpipe. He was never a DJ, but he went to this club. It was on Fire Island. It was a big gay resort, and the Sandpiper was this massive club. he went there in, I think it was probably 73 or something, 72, 73, heard the music, wasn't too struck with it, went back and made a tape. And he sent it to them and never heard anything. And I think that there was one night where they didn't have a DJ or something, and they stuck this tape on, and it went off massively.
Lit up. Wow. Well, his "My Love Is Free" is my personal favorite record of all time, actually, of that era.
Bolton made tapes like Labour Day and for special events, and that's what he did, and that's how he kind of broke through. Started doing edits in effect, and then early remixes. BT Express "Do It Till You're Satisfied" was a good example. And bit by bit, by 76, his name's everywhere. A Tom Moulton mix. He's the first person that I really, I didn't quite know what it was then mixing. We hadn't really worked out all these terms. That
is that. Are You Ready for Love as well as Elton John? It's absolutely fantastic what he did as well. We're talking about these producers and we're talking about the sounds. Look, it's a fantastic list of records you got here, but the variety of influences. I want to double down on the electronics. Like you got Moroder, I feel, but you got Kraftwerk, and suddenly you just blend of a very European sound with Kraftwerk into the emergence of these records and dance music, and just touch on the importance of what happened then, how kind of disco went up a gear with electronics, Greg.
Well, I mean, Kraftwerk and their experimentations and their sound was so different and revelationary, and they had a big chart hit with Autobahn. It wasn't so much a dance track but people were picking up on this. I mean, obviously Giorgio Moroder over in Germany and what he kind
of Dugga.
but I think the big one for me was the fact that in the Bronx, you had Bambaataa, who
got Planet Rock,
was like starting to play these tracks to his crowds at these block parties. He had the open-mindedness there to say, well, what he called them, these funky white guys from Germany. He didn't see a difference. This was just great music, and this along with other. Like Gary Newman was massive, Tubeway Army, and with the on the kind of Bronx black scene, like before hip hop broke out. And so, that became Planet Rock, and Planet Rock was TR-808 drum machine, Arthur Baker production, all of a sudden you had a sound that was so radically different. I mean, it was that it announced a new era for music. Also, like the drum machine being more mixable, the idea of like going back into the 70s. God knows how these DJs
keeping time,
kind of mixes with these real drummers on tracks and stuff. But at this point, you're kind of getting into an area closer to what we know now, where records are made to be mixed. And I think when the synthesizer and the drum machine and the sampler, once the sampler came into play, you had that whole 80s revolution. So from the electro sound that came out of people like Arthur Baker's Streetwise label, Tommy Boy, which released Planet Rock, you have people forget again that brought hip hop through. The Message was seen as an electro track at the time, Grandmaster, very electronic track, and this is what brought hip hop. I mean, before that, it was just Rapper's Delight. It was a novelty. And this was a big, rapping wasn't going to catch on. But then with The Message, this was socially conscious, serious lyrically, and people started to sit up and take notice. But apart from hip hop, you've got the house direction from Chicago and the techno direction from Detroit, which obviously are both going to be influenced by these events that are taking place in New York, these amazing remixes that are coming to the fore, like Liv Van and Jelly Bean Benitez, Shep Pettibone, Tony Humphries, T. Scott, all these people, who are basically rethinking music towards the dance floor. They're looking at it and a DJ perspective.
And Craig, if I may just to touch on the kind of, we've talked a lot about kind of underground clubs, underground records, labels, all coming together, but just a massive cultural. Saturday Night Fever. There's a guy in a white suit and he's dancing, and disco suddenly becomes a global phenomenon thing. And the soundtrack and the record and everything that happened around Saturday Night Fever, which was a very low budget movie. But just a kind of your thoughts on suddenly when disco blows up, it blows up on that kind of scale, you know? So, and just share some thoughts with your audience about Saturday Night Fever and the cultural importance of like that blowing up and all this stuff.
I mean, when I was a DJ at that time when Saturday Night Fever 1977 came out, and initially, you know, it was a positive reaction. Here was a film about our culture. This, you know, we were about clubs and dance music, and this film, and it was massive. It was the biggest.
And it's a very gritty film as well. It touches on a lot of very difficult subjects in the film too.
Yeah, I mean, there was a kind of, it reversed very quickly because, you know, people started dance classes and, you know.
People had leggings on.
And all of a sudden people coming into it with, you know, it just wasn't what it was to us, you know, people's idea of what disco is. I mean, following Saturday, and what it had done for me, prior to Saturday Night Fever, the symbol of disco was an Afro hair dancer on Soul Train, and a band of disco was the OJs, and that was the Bee Gees, and it was this white guy in a white suit with
a medallion,
which basically changed the whole thing. And you know, and that was the start of the slippery slope that led to Disco Sucks in a way, whereby disco became so big, so mainstream that the US radio stations started switching from rock formats to disco. The rock DJs got pissed off about that, especially a guy called Steve Dahl in Chicago, who decided to kind of go for this Disco Sucks movement, homophobic, racist, which ended with disco demolition at Comiskey Park in Chicago in 1979, where they had bonfires of records. It was like a Nazi burning, you know. And it wasn't just disco they were throwing in there. It was any black soul artist, whatever. It was, and I always think about that because another strange quirk is that Frankie Knuckles, a New York DJ, who his friend Larry Levan was offered the job at the warehouse in Chicago, and so he turned it down because he was doing Paradise Garage. Knuckles took the job, and the warehouse, the birthplace of house music, never played house music. Well, under Frankie Knuckles, you know, Frankie Knuckles was playing disco. The reason it was called house was because the local record shop did a box of records and they called it house music. This is the music that's being
playing in the warehouse. Brilliant.
Disco records and stuff that was in. There was no house music at the time.
No.
But Frankie Knuckles would have been working in the warehouse the night of the disco demolition. He was already in Chicago then. And later he made that famous statement, which was disco's, you know, house music is...
We transfer.
That's Rusty Egan. Hiya, Rusty.
Rusty. Where did he come from?
You want to go on mute, Rusty?
Unmute.
We were just talking about the Blitz Club a moment ago, Rusty, as well. Rusty Egan for the Blitz. Hiya, Rusty.
Can you hear me? Have I unmuted myself?
Rusty, hi. But if you, we're going to open up some questions and comment in a moment, but the Blitz got a good call out in the beautiful book by Greg. Wonderful stuff. But we're going to open up the questions in a moment. Greg, back to you. Sorry.
Well, I can't remember where I was at. I'm just...
Well, you're talking about Frankie at the warehouse. So to close off on it is an astonishing book, an astonishing journey you've been